Hey everybody, what's going on? Jubitaz back with a new video, and today I actually got a pretty interesting idea to tackle. You see, the title of Hokage is considered to be like the most honorable title that a shinobi can achieve throughout the story. In fact, it was always the main character, Naruto Uzumaki's biggest dream to become the Hokage so that everyone would acknowledge and respect him. However, Naruto is far from the only character to have this dream, and there have been many others that shared Naruto's ambition of becoming Hokage. So today, I will be going over all the potential or hypothetical Hokages that could have been, and even the ones that probably had no chance. And then I'll also briefly discuss how the rule as Hokage would have been. Now, once again, if this is your first rodeo with us, then may I suggest that you hit that subscribe button, and other than that, let's get down to business. Now, as Itachi said, you don't become acknowledged in order to become the Hokage. In fact, only those already acknowledged will ever become the Hokage. Which is why the obvious choice for the first Hokage was Hashirama Senju, the man that was acknowledged as the god amongst shinobi. And he was also acknowledged as the one that initiated the pact between the Uchiha and the Senju, which eventually led to the creation of the Leaf Village. Now, Hashirama at first wanted to give that position to Madara, as Madara had lost all his siblings, so Hashirama wanted him to become the Hokage and use the villagers to replace the loss of his family. However, both Tobirama and the elders of the Land of Fire refused that notion, and by the time Hashirama offered him the chance to become the second Hokage, Madara had different ambitions. Plus, he believed that the position would be handed down to Tobirama instead anyways. So, our first candidate will be Madara. What would Madara have been like as the Hokage? Now, obviously, Madara is more than strong enough to take on that role, but what would his reign have been like? Would he have seen the village as his family, like Hashirama had wished for? I mean, possibly, especially if he became the first Hokage. However, Madara wasn't a softie like his best friend, and considering he's a reincarnate of Indra, he believed in power over teamwork. He likely would have ruled with an iron fist and had zero tolerance for any dissent and any threat that was posed to the village. We do get to see an example of Madara before his defection, acting as a diplomat for Konoha, where he basically told the Stone Village to submit to the Leaf Smite. So it's likely that he would have went around and done that with all the other great nations too. He had the power to crush them all, so he would likely want to boost Konoha to a superpower status. And that would likely make the other villages resented more than they already did in the original timeline. The question lies on how far will Hashirama really allow him to go. This would be a pretty interesting timeline to see, not gonna lie. Next up, we got the Uchiha Naruto, Obito. The whole narrative behind Obito was that he was the Naruto that fell off his path and was plunged into darkness. So just like Naruto, Obito shared his dream of becoming the Hokage, likely so that he can get acknowledged by the villagers and by his peers and, obviously by Rin, who supported his dream of becoming the Hokage. However, after she died and his world got turned upside down, Obito abandoned his old ideals for a different dream. Though even through all of that, he still believed that his actions were no different than that of a Hokage's, in fact superior, as the Tsukuyomi world would guarantee that everyone, not just the residents of the Leaf, lived their ideal world. Now, of course, most shinobi were not okay with that idea, and Naruto knocked some sense into Obito and even leveraged their shared dream to question his actions, and before he died, Obito entrusted his dream to Naruto, saying, "You better become the Hokage." So what would it look like if Obito himself was the Hokage, assuming that he picked another path after Rin's death? Well, we actually see a little montage of that in the anime. If Obito returned to Konoha and worked his way up to the role of the Hokage, considering that he's a parallel to Naruto, the narrative implication is that he would have been just as caring of a Hokage and would have seen the village as his family. I can see him being along the ranks of Minato, Kakashi, and Naruto when it comes to his rule, which means that the village will likely be prosperous, and no one would really fuck with it considering that he'd be one of the strongest Hokage. I mean, imagine Kakashi, Guy, and Obito. That trio would be undefeated. The next generation would also get to grow up in a more peaceful and prosperous age. Overall, a pretty interesting timeline as well. And now, let's go to some of the darker visions of the Hokage. When Sasuke reunited with Team 7, he said that he was going to become the Hokage despite everyone's disapproval, which he didn't care about in the first place. And he expanded on what his idea of a Hokage was to Naruto when they returned to the Valley of the End. After Sasuke revived and spoke to the first Hokage, he had a much more profound definition of that role. The Hokage is the one who endures pain for the sake of the village. Just like how Hashirama had to kill his best friend, or how Itachi had to slaughter his clan and take on all the village's darkness by himself to maintain the village's equilibrium. Sasuke saw his brother as the true Hokage, a shinobi that always put the village above himself, even if it meant being hated by everyone. Sasuke was willing to follow in his footsteps. Sasuke's vision of the Hokage was rather dark and pretty different. He didn't want to wear the Hokage hat and sit down in the office and do a bunch of paperwork. He was gonna kill the 5 Kage and the tailed beasts to sever the shinobi world's link to the past and solidify himself as the new enemy. He was gonna take on the burden of being hated by everyone just so that shinobi can remain united against a common enemy, that being him, and just like Itachi, he would bear the darkness of the shinobi world alone. And of course, he was gonna have to kill Naruto since A. Naruto was a link to all the tailed beasts, and B. Naruto was never going to allow him to be alone and take on this villainous role. So how would it have gone like if Sasuke won that final battle and became the Hokage? Well, that's actually a pretty long and complex topic that could call for its own video, but basically, if he killed Naruto and then the 5 Kage and the tailed beasts after he released everyone from the infinite Tsukuyomi, then it would likely go exactly as he planned. Naruto was seen as the hero of the world, so the act of killing him alone would be enough to unite everyone against him. It's possible that even Kakashi and Sakura would think that he's gone too far with that. Sasuke would be globally hated, meaning that the 5 nations would remain united as they always needed a common enemy to maintain peace between them. And Sasuke would probably show up every once in a while to assert that he's still alive and a threat to the shinobi. Though he will live a lonely and pretty miserable life, even if he's the one that signed up for it. Overall, it's a pretty grim timeline, but hey, on the bright side, at least we won't have Boruto in this scenario. And now, keeping up with the darker Hokage candidates, we got the Snake Man, Orochimaru, who was a disciple of the 3rd Hokage and was considered a candidate for his successor. However, his sensei could see the darkness and deranged nature of his student and chose to go with another path. It was portrayed in the beginning of the story that the reason Orochimaru had a grudge against the village was because he was overlooked by his own mentor, and the 4th, Minato Namikaze, was chosen over him. And while there may be some small truth to that, it was also a gross oversimplification. Like sure, Orochimaru may have had some surface level interest in becoming the Hokage, but his true ambitions lied beyond that. Having been disillusioned with mortality, Orochimaru wanted to unlock the mysteries of nature and achieve eternal life. The position of Hokage would have just made his work that much easier. After Orochimaru was denied that role, he pushed himself deeper into his research. But of course, once his research was discovered by the 3rd Hokage, he was forced to flee and leave his laboratory and go rogue. But this one's interesting. How would the village have been like if Orochimaru was chosen as the 4th Hokage? Well, this would be a pretty dark era for Konoha, as it is likely that if he were selected as the Hokage, he would work side to side with Danzo and the Foundation, basically the deep state of Konoha, to further advance his research in human experimentation. This time, all the kidnappings and abductions will be state-sponsored, so it will likely be a new age of inventions and scientific development, but it will also be a dark time where members of the Foundation will be kidnapping children as test subjects so that Orochimaru can recreate extinct abilities, and I believe that Uchiha in particular will be targeted. Orochimaru as Hokage will also have access to all sorts of DNA databases, so he will likely develop an army of the undead in secret, just like Kabuto. So while I think that Konoha might be at the height of technological and scientific advancements, it will also be a very bleak and scandalous period. It'll basically be like Cold War times. there's no telling what type of inner dissent will result from Orochimaru and Danzo's tyranny. And now let's go back to the Uchiha clan. Now there was another potential candidate for the title of 4th Hokage, that being Fugaku Uchiha, the leader of the Uchiha clan, and father of Sasuke and Itachi. Like Minato, Fugaku was also a hero of the Third Ninja War that earned the moniker of Wicked-Eyed Fugaku, and many within the Uchiha clan believed that he was a right choice for the Hokage, and they attributed Fugaku not being chosen due to the tense relationship between the clan and the village higher-ups. Now whether this was just a bias on the clan's part, or if Fugaku really was a beast, is hard to say, considering that Fugaku is one of the most obscure characters in the show, and we never see him fight. To be fair, he was in a contest with Minato and Orochimaru, so for him to be compared to them at all implies that he's pretty tough. But what would it look like if Fugaku was the 4th Hokage? Well, that would heavily depend on the scenario that unfolds. Meaning, whether the village elders choose Fugaku as a gesture of good faith for the Uchiha clan, or the Uchiha clan usurp the power and forcibly make Fugaku the Hokage. I can't see the first scenario unfolding, since the elders really had an issue with the Uchiha clan and would have never approved of Fugaku as the Hokage. The second scenario was more in line with the Uchiha clan's plans, and I believe that if they had Itachi and Shisui on their side, then they could have secured the position of Hokage. Of course, many of the villagers would have had a problem with that, as it would have been seen as an authoritarian and unfavorable move. It's hard to tell how Fugaku would have been like as Hokage. I believe he wouldn't be as authoritarian as Madara, but he would still try to get residents to be in line with his policies. The implication was that Fugaku didn't even want to become Hokage that much, so I can't say that he would have made a great one. But he might have kicked the elders out, so that's one decision that I can get behind. And now let's go to another Uchiha candidate that would have actually made a lot of sense, Itachi Uchiha. Itachi was already thinking like a Hokage when he was just 6 years old, and he had the ambition to become the Hokage just so that he could maintain the peace and security of the village. When Itachi was just 4 years old, his father took him to the battlefield and showed him what war was like, and that made Itachi a pacifist and a strong believer in the village framework. Despite how flawed it was at least less chaotic than the Warring States era. All of that led Itachi to become a pacifist at heart and value the village's framework above all else. And Danzo exploited that to have Itachi carry out his bidding. Sasuke saw Itachi as the true Hokage, as it was him, not Hiruzen, and definitely not Danzo, that took on all the village's darkness by himself and became the subject of Sasuke's hatred just to protect the village. So you could say that Itachi already took on the responsibilities of a Hokage without assuming the role. But what would happen if Itachi became the Hokage? Well, this was actually something inferred in the Itachi Shinden novel. Before Fugaku died, he had a moment of regret where he realized that Itachi could have changed the clan's fate without bloodshed, and that he could have become the Hokage, and that may have mended the relationship between the village and the clan. So if the coup d'etat was pushed back until then, and Itachi became the Hokage, it's likely that he could have healed the rift between the Uchiha and the rest of the village. Itachi is very skilled, powerful, and one of the smartest characters. He's also willing to do anything to uphold the peace, so I have no doubt in my mind that the village would thrive under Itachi's rule. And with the Uchiha well integrated within the village, Konoha's military would be uncontested. I'm sure Danzo won't be okay with that, but Itachi is wise and not spineless like Hiruzen, so I think he'd recognize the threat that Danzo posed and either banish him or execute him. Best case, he strips him of all his power. And if he does that, then I have no doubts that the village would be prosperous under Itachi's rule. And now let's go back to the Sannin. We already talked about Orochimaru, and Tsunade became the 5th Hokage in canon, so let's talk about Jeriah, who was approached first by the elders Koharu and Hamura after the death of the 3rd, as he was the first candidate. Jeriah was apparently such a desirable candidate for Hokage that the Land of Fire's feudal lord personally wanted Jeriah to take up the position. Of course, as we know, Jeriah was not interested in that role that had so many responsibilities, and he preferred to live a carefree, unrestricted life, traveling the world, writing, picking up women, spying on women, going to the brothel, that type of thing. But what would happen if Jeriah was forced to become the Hokage? Well, I believe that his reign would be kinda similar to that of Tsunade's. The Sannin are all similar in terms of their powers and in terms of their flaws, with the obvious difference being Orochimaru's far more deranged. But anyways, Jeriah would be a similar Hokage to Tsunade, reluctant to take the role, can get serious when he needs to be, and instead of going to drink and gamble on his off times, he'd go peeping in the hot springs. I mean, I can imagine Jeriah spying on some unsuspecting women and Kakashi being like, "Lord Hokage, don't you have some paperwork to get to?" Nah, but for real, Jeriah's pretty wise, so if he became the Hokage, then he might clean his act up, at least a bit. Plus, Jeriah is quite friendly, so maybe he'll be able to create some strong alliances with the other nations. Maybe he'll have the will to do a good job as the Hokage, if only to win Tsunade's heart. However, Tsunade was plunged into a deep depression after all those that she loved had perished. And there was one man in particular who had always been at the forefront of her mind, and he's also another man that wanted to become the Hokage. That ninja is none other than Dan Kato, someone that I didn't talk about that often on my channel because of how obscure he is. Dan Kato and Tsunade met and bonded over their shared ideals, and in particular, their admiration of the Hokage role. Dan had the same dream that Tsunade's late brother had, to become the Hokage so that he could better protect the village of Konoha. That's when Tsunade decided to give him her grandfather's necklace. So what would it look like if Dan Kato became the Hokage? Well, I would imagine that Tsunade would have been real happy and remained by his side. Maybe she wouldn't have turned to drinking and gambling. Well, maybe not, considering that Hashirama implied that Tsunade was gambling from when she was a kid. But I digress. Now, Dan definitely had the will of fire required to become the Hokage, so I'm sure he'll make a good ruler. The only question is whether he's Kage level in strength. His Ghost Transformation Jutsu, sure, is Kage level, but other than that, he was kinda compared to Asuma by Kakuzu, so it's hard to say with certainty that he is. Fun fact, we did get to see Dan Kato briefly act as the Hokage in Tsunade's Infinite Tsukuyomi dream in the War Arc filler, and in that timeline, the village was in a peaceful era free from war and loss, so it seems like he'd be a great Hokage, or at least according to Tsunade's delusions. However, Dan Kato isn't the only one close to Tsunade that wanted to become the Hokage. The first one that took on that role was her younger brother Nawaki, who wanted to become the Hokage to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and protect the village that he created. But you know, Nawaki never really got the chance to grow up, let alone show his capabilities as a shinobi. Like, you'd assume he would have grown up to be a powerful ninja considering that he's a direct descendant of Hashirama Senju, but like, we really see nothing of this boy. Like, he just died in some random explosion. So I can't really say what he would have been like as the Hokage. It could have been interesting to see him all grown up. Maybe he would have shown some potential then. But the truth is, he was just a background character used for Tsunade's backstory. Now, another character that always wanted to become the Hokage as well because of his grandfather, but probably had the lowest chances out of all the characters we discussed so far, is Konohamaru Saratobi. Now, to be frank, I think the reason most people advocate for him to become the Hokage is due to his lineage, you know, as the grandson of the third. He's also like the only disciple of Naruto really, and he's always following in his footsteps and basically learned all of his jutsu, and he even had the same ninja registration photo as Naruto. Konohamaru also shared Naruto's dream of becoming the Hokage, and they had this friendly rivalry, though I wouldn't really call it a real rivalry. I mean, we all saw what happened when Naruto started taking it seriously and beat the bejesus out of Konohamaru. Like Nawaki, Konohamaru was too young in part 1 and Shippuden to truly show off much of his skills, but unlike Nawaki, he did get to grow up in the sequel series Boruto, where he was the new Team 7 sensei. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that his performance in the manga has usually been lackluster. I mean, he usually has to get saved by his own team of genin. So what would it have looked like if Konohamaru became the 8th Hokage after Naruto was sealed away? Well, frankly, it would have been awful for the Leaf. He doesn't have Shikamaru's intellect or the skills to contend with any of the heavy hitters, and considering the villains they'll have to deal with, like Code or Yura and the sentient God Tree people, yeah, Konoha would get wiped off the map. Though funnily enough, we might still have one candidate left that's somehow even worse than Konohamaru, another person that's dreamed of becoming the Hokage and that ironically only ever came close to it in his own dreams. Of course, I'm talking about Kida Inuzuka, a character that gets clowned on by the entire fanbase. I think the reason is because he was talking a lot of shit about Team 7 at first, and then he turned out to be a part of the most irrelevant team, and his combat skills are considered to be the lowest of the rookies. I mean, he really only has one move, the Fang over Fang, where he turns into a big dog and just spins around. But anyways, what would it be like if Kiba became the Hokage? Well, from what we saw in his dream, he'd make it mandatory for everyone to have a dog. Yeah, that's kind of it. I really can't see him being able to defend the village from any threat it may face, but hey, maybe he'll at least be able to cure depression by ensuring that every ninja has a puppy and save them from loneliness and solitude. And then finally, we got one more character who had the ambition to become the Hokage. Not a Naruto character per se, well, technically a Naruto character since she did appear in the last chapter of the manga. Sarada Uchia, daughter of Sasuke and Sakura. Sarada's role model was her father's rival, the 7th Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki. She was so inspired by Naruto that she developed the same ambition he had as a kid, to become the Hokage, and that goal kept her going through all her ninja training. Of course, things got a bit complicated after Naruto was sealed and Boruto took the fall for it and left the village. Sarada was the only one that still saw Boruto for who he was, and she convinced Sasuke to go and help him. Ever since then, she hasn't brought up that dream often, but it's probably because of how chaotic things got. So, what would it look like if she were the Hokage? Well, it'd actually wrap everything up quite nicely, having Naruto's believer, Sasuke's daughter, become the Hokage. She understood what the role entailed, so I have no doubt that she would have committed herself to it, and her Mangekyo ability is pretty powerful. Plus, she would be the first Uchiha Hokage, which is poetic in a way. And those have been all the viable Hokage candidates, or the characters that have wanted to become Hokage at one point or another. I mean, I guess there's also Kushina, who did say that she wanted to become the Hokage in her first day of school, but it seems like she was okay becoming the housewife to a Hokage instead. There's also these two other characters that were kind of Hokage but didn't get their faces engraved. The first being Danzo, who had the ambition to become the Hokage ever since Hiruzen was chosen over him, but I guess we got to see exactly what his reign would have been like. The next is Shikamaru in the Boruto era, who doesn't seem to have fully accepted his role and is basically just filling in for Naruto, but basically everyone treats him like the 8th Hokage. But yeah, it's interesting. When you think about it, there are many Hokage candidates throughout the story. I guess that's what makes Naruto the main character. He's the one that actually made it to that role, but I guess there's 6 other Hokages too. Anyways, this has been it for today's video. Now, as many of you can tell, I have been away for a bit, but I wanted to tell you that I'm back and you should be expecting a lot of new videos this summer. But in the meantime, may I suggest checking out some of these old Jubitaz bangers until we get to those videos. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.